Well, we start, of course, with political shockwaves here in France after former President Nicolas Sarkozy was handed a 5-year prison sentence for criminal conspiracy. As soon as he's behind bars, then, that ruling will make him the first former president to have served jail time, though he's not the first to have been convicted to a prison sentence. For many, largely on the political right, Sarkozy's conviction is just one example of what they see as a justice system that is unreasonably harsh on politicians in particular. Camille Knight explains.
He's the first former president of modern France to be sentenced to time behind bars.
If they really want me to sleep in prison, I'll sleep in prison, but with my head held high.
But it's the decision to incarcerate the 70-year-old despite his intention to appeal that took many by surprise.
This is a completely unprecedented decision, and it feels a bit like the courts want to set an example, particularly by ordering provisional enforcement, which means that the appeal doesn't suspend Nicolas Sarkozy's detention and imprisonment.
This so-called exécution provisoire is a mechanism specific to French law. It means that while Sarkozy is presumed innocent while his appeal is pending, he'll still begin serving time in prison. Judges justified the decision, citing the political seriousness of the case, but supporters of Sarkozy have called it disproportionate, even dangerous. The same mechanism was applied to National Rally leader Marine Le Pen when she was sentenced to an immediate ban on running for office back in March after being found guilty of embezzling European funds, a decision she slammed as political.
It's become clear to me that a number of magistrates have got sort of scorecard where they're trying to pin down as many politicians as possible. It's a break with the fundamental principle of our law, starting with the most important one, the presumption of innocence.
Sarkozy has been asked to appear before the prosecutor's office on the 13th of October to find out the date of his incarceration.
Well, for more, we're going to speak now to Andrew Knapp, Emeritus Professor of French Politics and Contemporary History at the University of Reading. Thank you so very much for joining us today, Professor Knapp. So to get started, there's a clear divide that has emerged in the wake of this conviction, not only this one, but others recently. Those who think that the judicial system is too lax with public officials and those who think the exact opposite, that it's simply too harsh, as we heard in that report there. How do you explain such diverging views?
France is a very divided society right now. But when we look back even at a poll just after Marine Le Pen's conviction in February this year, I have 69% of the French saying the justice system is too lenient and 68% saying it is politicized and only 23% saying it treats everyone equally. Now, you can interpret these figures in a number of different ways, but one way is French feeling that there's one class of people, the elites, who get off lightly, while ordinary people are very harshly treated by the justice system. And I think it's partly to counteract that perception that the elite can hire fancy lawyers who can appeal and appeal and appeal and never actually serve their sentences, that partly explains the recent actions by the justice system against first Marine Le Pen and then Nicolas Sarkozy. Yes, they can appeal, but they can't spin these things out with impunity. But clearly, that's not the sentiment of many on the right, and the right, on the whole, has the wind in its sails, and they think that that their people are being persecuted by lefty lawyers and lefty judges.
And they think that even though Sarkozy isn't the only high-level politician to face judicial scrutiny, certainly not in the past couple of years, as you mentioned Marine Le Pen earlier, but also it's not only the right that's been accused of various degrees of crimes over the past, since the start really of the French Fifth Republic. So how does Sarkozy's case compare to others? If we take most recent examples, that of Marine Le Pen or even François Bayrou, just to name a couple of recent ones.
Well, the comparison between Marine Le Pen and François Bayrou is interesting because both of them were accused of using European Union funding designed to designed to meet the expenses of a parliamentary group for political expenses at home. And Bayrou, although several other people in his centrist party were convicted, Bayrou personally was let off the hook. Marine Le Pen was convicted, and that is what has led to her ban from holding elected office until, at any rate, her appeal is heard, and maybe then she will get a more lenient sentence. So that is an interesting comparison. Going back further, we have, under the last left-wing president, François Hollande, his minister for the budget, Jérôme Cahuzac, was convicted of money laundering, notably, and he served time with an electronic bracelet, a relatively lenient penalty compared to a real prison sentence, but he was nonetheless convicted. So I think it's not very fair to suggest that it's only right-wing figures who get punished. It's just that the left hasn't been in power for quite a long time, and memories are short.
Sarkozy's numerous legal troubles have not at all made him a pariah on the French political scene. He still has considerable influence. He's popular on the right. Even now, there have been no shortage of words of support for him, including from the current interior minister. How do you explain politicians' failure to distance themselves from people accused of or committed of crimes when the public, for its part, is clearly demanding more integrity in French politics?
Yes, the current Interior Minister, Monsieur Bruno Retailleau, is, of course, a member of Sarkozy's party. And he, as it were, has form on this, because, of course, it's not only Sarkozy who has been convicted, it's also both his former interior ministers and, in a completely separate affair some years ago, his prime minister, François Fillon, was accused in the middle of the 2017 presidential election campaign, in which he was a candidate, and then convicted over a sleazy affair of using parliamentary expenses for his own personal use. And in the middle of that affair, Bruno Retailleau, in 2017, was practically the last man left standing who said that François Fillon, former prime minister, should actually no longer be a candidate for the Les Républicains party. So Retailleau has form on that. Moreover, Retailleau is on record as saying that the état de droit, as the French
Professor Knapp, I'm so sorry to cut you off. I want to make sure we're able to get our last report in and hear from you on that. So do stay with us for a couple of minutes additional if you can.
Okay.
In the meantime, then, as you will have known, France's public debt this week ballooned to a record 3.4 trillion euros, putting even more pressure on the new prime minister to find a swift solution. Sébastian Lecornu has already ruled out reintroducing a wealth tax or suspending Macron's controversial pension reform, giving some clues as to his policy plans. Charlotte Lamb with more.
A new government in France is just days away. And in a headline-grabbing interview, its new prime minister gave a glimpse of what's to come. Sébastian Lecornu has ruled out bringing back the wealth tax and the country's Zoukman tax, which would be a proposed 2% levy on high-net individuals. He also discarded a demand from the left to suspend the controversial pension reform, saying it would not solve any problems. The French business movement has applauded the stance, while the Socialist Party accused the incoming government of refusing to compromise, vowing to support a motion of censure. Something leader of the left-wing Unbowed France party, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, has called the entire left to back. He says his deputies will file the motion at the start of a parliamentary session in October. That leaves the National Rally in a decisive position. Lecornu has signalled an opening to them by saying he is ready to examine possible changes to France's social assistance scheme for undocumented migrants. On the fiscal front, the Prime Minister says the 2026 budget will include $6 billion more for pensions, $5 billion more for healthcare, and $6 billion less in state spending. He also promised tighter control of social spending and local governments, along with a major bill to fight social and tax fraud. But will it be enough to stabilise public finances? France's debt climbed again in the second financial quarter, now reaching 115.6% of GDP. Lecornu is targeting a 4.7% deficit next year, barely different from François Bayrou's 4.6%, the goal that helped cost the former Prime Minister his job.
We'll bring back Professor Andrew Knapp now. Andrew, it doesn't seem like this government then is any closer to its predecessors than considering some of the concerns on the left. What do you think that means for the chances of its survival?
Well, first of all, there isn't a government yet. Monsieur Lecornu hasn't actually hasn't proposed the appointment of any ministers. Macron hasn't appointed any ministers on Lecornu's suggestion. So all Lecornu has done so far is presented his outlines as Prime Minister of a budget. I cannot see the left supporting this budget in any shape or form. The socialists really will not want to do a deal with this Prime Minister, which does not have at least some of the things that they're asking for, and notably some form of wealth tax, which incidentally is a pretty popular sort of measure among the French. They may lean right on matters of immigration, but there's quite a lot of sympathy in the wider public for this ostensibly left-wing measure, the wealth tax, and they simply cannot see the socialists, let alone the La France Insoumise, France Unbowed, voting for a budget in its current shape and form. So that would place Lecornu in a state of enhanced dependence on the Rassemblement National, on Le Pen's party. And then it's a matter for Le Pen's party as to whether they wish to do some sort of deal with Lecornu. It seems to me fairly unlikely, or whether they merely wish to sit on their hands, which would bring France one step closer to the dissolution of Parliament and new parliamentary elections for the third time in 3.5 years.
Indeed, sounds like it is very likely then that another episode of Deja Vu is to be expected in the coming months. Again, as you say, Lecornu, of course, expected to name a government in the coming days. Andrew Knapp, Emeritus Professor of French Politics and Contemporary History at the University of Reading, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Well, hundreds of French farmers and over a dozen tractors mobilized against the controversial planned EU-Mercosur free trade deal this week, gathering at the call of the country's largest farm union in front of the Versailles Castle just outside Paris. Their objective was to grab Emmanuel Macron's attention and urge his government to protect the French agricultural sector from what many view as unfair competition that would be brought on by this deal. The European Commission presented the agreement for approval earlier this month and appears to be responding to some of France's opposition, at least with promises to potentially limit farm product imports, though it is unclear whether or not that will be enough to appease these unions. Take a listen.
Today there is an agreement that will be signed in Mercosur, and today we will denounce unfair competition. Many requirements are imposed on French agriculture and products are imported that don't comply with these same clauses.
It's simple. Today I will give you the example of chicken because it's the easiest to see. Today I have farmers from Landes who have empty buildings because in fact they can no longer make a living, so they prefer to stop producing. They have empty buildings, and alongside that we import meat at prices we can't match.
What we want is for consumers to have quality food. This is what France has been offering for years by being the biggest sustainable model in the world. And two, food will not be produced without farmers, and farmers need to survive to continue. There is an economic change to be made, and the over-regulating costs us too much.
Well, that's all we have for you for this edition. Thank you very much for joining us here on Around the World. Stay tuned. There's more coming up in just about 2 minutes.